Well, hello again and welcome to another edition of Shed Talk, my weekly magazine video series looking at the keeping, breeding and showing of cage birds with a particular focus on the exhibition style budgerigar. And the big focus in fact in this episode will be on beginning those early preparations for the upcoming breeding season, and the start of that is by me sorting out the hens. And in this episode I hope to show you some of the top hens in my shed as I've assessed them. But we'll talk a bit more about assessing the birds, how I go about that in just a second. What I would like to do to begin with is give a big thank you to the Northampton Budgerigar Society, Northamptonshire Budgerigar Society. Those of you that are regular viewers will know that I was up there last weekend showing. It was a really enjoyable show, absolutely brilliant. So a big thank you to all those who from Northamptonshire Budgerigar Society who put the effort in to laying on yet again another show, or another great show, particularly show manager, show secretary, all those people who work behind the scenes to make it work. And I won't forget, of course, to say a big thank you to the catering staff, because it was an absolutely wonderful meal, as always, and I really did enjoy the extra large helping of sponge cake. Anyway, that's the Northampton show. How did I get on? I'll talk about that when we've had a look at the short video of the show and some of the birds that were on show there. But while I'm talking about Northamptonshire show, a big thank you to Alan Reed, I believe it was Alan Reed, who came up to me at the show and said how much he enjoyed the watching each of these episodes, and thanked me for producing them. But thank you very much, Alan, for your kind feedback at the show. And if ever you see me at any of the shows, do come up and just introduce yourself, let me know, and I will try and give you a mention in a future episode. So we'll begin, I think, before we get any birds out of the cage, by talking about how I go about my annual assessment of birds and what that leads into, I suppose. Well, as I say, I'm actually going to we're going to begin the assessment, first of many that I will have to do, with the young hens. So this year's hens, which are all of them are in the flight that's directly behind me. You may remember I'd only left the hens in there, so that's what I will begin with. So my assessment of all of the birds, so whether it be the hens, the cock, any age, or the young birds, I have a spreadsheet that I have the ring number of all the birds down one side and their colour, and then along the rest of that, I'll show you a picture of it. Along the rest of that side is what I compare them against. So there are a number of categories that I compare them against. I judge them each out of 5. I try not to use half points, but occasionally I might do. So with 5 being that that's the best I would expect, 3 being just above average, and then 2 being just below average, I suppose, and 1 being terrible. And if they get a 0, it means that they're really bad. I also, one of the categories is what I refer to as major faults, and that would include ticking and any other faults that I'm trying to eliminate from my particular shed. And you may remember I've got a particular problem with hinge tail, so that will go in there as well. If they've got a fault such as really bad ticking, then they would almost certainly score a 0 for that particular fault, and if they don't have any faults at all, then they would get a 5. The other thing that I do is, like most breeders, I try to keep the shed relatively young. So in order to help me with that, I weight the final score against their age. And you can see it here. What I do is I put the age, so So starting with a 1 if they're this year's bird, and then adding a 1 onto that every time they go up an egg. So last year's bred birds would have been 1 last time I assessed them, and they get a 2 this time. And then what that does is that impacts on the final score. So a bird might actually be a better bird, but if it's 5 years old, then the weighted score will bring it down. So that's my, plan, I suppose. A weighted score will bring it down, and a young bird will always, will therefore, the young birds will tend to dominate the order, the final score in order that I would put them in. And I will then use that scoring system, and in this case I'm going to keep the top 24 hens, or as best I can the top 24 hens. What I do though is I put a cut-off point, and the cut-off point is nearly always around about 20 points. So anything that scores less than 20 wouldn't be kept at all anyway, or would go into the sales cage, I suppose. So that's the way I do it. That's the spreadsheet that I use. If anybody would like a copy of that spreadsheet, just let me know in the comments, and what I will do is I will put a template of it across on the Facebook page, and people can then download it, save it, and then use it themselves if they want to. So anyway, what I'll do now then is I'm going to start getting the young birds out and start doing that initial assessment of the young birds. While I'm getting ready for that, why don't we take a quick look at the Northamptonshire, or some of the highlights from the Northamptonshire. McKay, big smiles. Best in show. Well done, Bob. Excellent news. There we go. I hope you enjoyed that look at Northampton show. As I said, it was a really enjoyable show, so thanks to everybody for putting that on for us. And of course, best in show went to a friend of this channel, Mr. Bob McCabe. Those of you that watch the channel for a little while will know that we went out early on in the year. We actually went out and visited Bob at his shed. If you haven't seen that episode, it's well worth going and have a look. Bob talks about his birds and about the way he does things within his sheds, and quite clearly you can see that whole process that he's using is working. So if you haven't seen that episode, what I will do is put a quick link across the top of the screen up there, I hope it will be, to that particular episode. Do go across and have a look at it, like I say, well worth a look. And while we're on the subject of Bob McCabe, what I thought I'd do is start off with a bird that we've seen before, one of the young birds that's in there. So it's a young opaline cinnamon hen, and it was actually bred off of an outcross from Bob McCabe that we got, I think it was midway through last year, or it might have been at the very beginning of last year. Anyway, we start off with that one because I've said it before, and I've said it a couple of times, that I think this is amongst the best hens that I've bred this year. So that's probably going to be the benchmark, although, having said that, there's another dark green hen in the flight that is also looking fairly useful. Anyway, I'll start off with this one. But what I will do is, once I've done a few of them and got most of them in an order, we'll take a look at the top 10. So having spent the last 2 or 3 days sorting through these hens and scoring them, finally got them into some sort of order that I'm happy with. After I've scored them, what I then do is I place them back on the bench, for want of a better word, so where I study the birds, and I will then do a direct bird to bird comparison, and just to check I've not made any obvious errors. In most cases I'm reasonably happy, and where there are little changes that I think, oh, that bird's a bit better than that bird, when I look at the score, they've probably scored identical, and it's just 1 or 2 features that that have scored slightly differently, and I may be a little bit biased towards one feature than the other. But generally I've got them in the right order, but like I say, I do a direct comparison and swap them around. I normally have about 3 or 4 birds up, just so I can have a look at them. What we will do now then though is we'll have a look at I think the top 10, possibly the top 12 birds, I'm not quite sure. It might even be less than that, but we'll have a look at some of the top birds. Let's put it that way. So we'll have a look at some of the top birds, and you can have a look and see the order that I've put them in. You may or may not be surprised with the bird that came, or the hen that came top. One of the things I'll say before we start is that all of the birds that came in the top 12, and certainly all the birds that came in the top 8, so the first birds that go into the breeding cage, are all this year bred hens, which I'm really pleased with, because what that means is that there's been an improvement on the hens that I were breeding with last year. That's based on the weighted score, so keeping the shed young, as you might remember. If I take the weighted score out, still the top 5 birds were all of this year's bred hens. So with that in mind, it does mean that I have, from my point of view, improved the quality of the hens that I'm breeding with. And certainly the bird that came out as number 1, I'm actually very pleased with. I think it's going to be a very useful hen for me in the next breeding season. But let's have a quick look at them then. three then, or the third best, currently when I'm looking at them, is this cinnamon light green. This bird actually scored the same as the bird that came second, but when I put them in the show cage next to each other, I still prefer the bird that came second over this one, when I'm doing a direct comparison. But overall, I'm quite pleased that this is my third best bird. In terms of the hens, again, I'll see if I can get her to stand a little bit better for us. She's obviously broken a quill on the top of her head, hence the bleeding up there. This bird is one of the early bred birds, but still may have a little bit of growing to do. Not being the tidiest bird in the show cage, is she? I think she's upset with me talking and filming, so I'll just see if she settles a little tiny bit. We do get a few nice views of her anyway. So definitely number 3, and will definitely be used quite early on in the breeding season, I think, seeing as it's one of the older birds. So we'll move on to number 2, and then the top bird. So the bird that came runner-up then in my young bird rundown, maybe a bit of a surprise because I've always said this is one of my favourite birds, an opaline cinnamon sky blue, and it's off of the McCabe outcross, you will remember, and is actually the sister of the opaline we saw earlier, I do believe. So I do still like this bird, and you'll see when I show you the winning bird. The winning bird is actually substantially or quite a bit younger than this bird, so it was one of my decisions as to why it would come top, but overall already I think the winning bird, or the bird that beat this, is actually a better bird than it, and is a bird that I am really actually quite pleased with. But I'm pleased with this one as well, and it will go straight into the breeding cage, and we need to work out what we're going to put this one with. So number 2 then is this opaline sky blue cinnamon. So which bird beat it then? I expect those of you that have been members of the Shed Talk Facebook page may have a suspicion, because it's a bird that I posted on there saying it caught my eye in the cage. So let's move on to the top hen in my stud at the moment. And here she is then, number 1 in the shed. This lovely hen, or I think it is, for my shed, stands out, and you'll see it in comparison to number 2 and number 3 shortly. Really does have something, this bird. It's big, stands well, got lovely facial features, and overall I think this is a nice hen, and is a massive improvement on any of the hens that I put down last year, and it would have been everything irrespective of age. In fact, all of those that were in the top 12 really would have beaten almost anything apart from 3 birds based on age. So really pleased with that, but I'm very pleased with how this bird is turning out. Like I say, much younger than the opaline. In fact, it's one of the youngest birds in the stud. Again, I think, and I will need to double check, and like I say, it will be along the bottom as per the others. I think this blue family, that cobalt. So I may put this back to its granddad, which is a light blue cockbird, but we'll have to wait and see when I do my assessment of the cockbirds. Anyway, we've looked at that. What we'll do now is I will put all 3 of the top 3 birds up, so you can have a look at them and compare them side by side. So I've put all of the birds that I think are gonna make the show team back into that stock cage, the two holding cages. That will only be for a few days while I begin to sort through the cockbirds and see which one of the cockbirds will make the breeding team. I'm glad I got the hens out of the way because, you know, they are ferocious, to say the least, or some of them. One or two of them are absolutely ferocious, and there was a little bit of blood on the thumb a few times throughout the last couple of days, and a bit of cursing from me. But anyway, that's part of the thing. I don't know why hens seem to be more aggressive than the cockbirds. I suppose it's because they're the ones in the nest box, and the ones who have to defend the nest box against predators. But like I say, hens are all done, and I'm pleased with the way the hens have worked out. That almost all of the birds that have made the breeding team for this year are currently bred, and you know, they're all an improvement, or most of those are an improvement on the birds that we had in the breeding team last year. Indeed, I think out of the top, you know, the top 10, there would have only been 2 birds, possibly 3 from last year, that would have made the top 10 if it hadn't been for the weighting. So I'm pleased with that, and certainly the top 5 birds are there on merit. You know, they are better than anything else that I've got currently in the shed in terms of hens. But like I say, now we've done the hens, we need to move on to the cock birds over the next few days. That will be in a future video. And whilst I'm happy with the way the hens have progressed, I'm less happy with the way the cockbirds have progressed, and some of that was borne out by the Northampton show, and I know I said I would let you know how I got on there. I suppose generally I'm a little bit disappointed. In terms of the young bird class, the 2 young birds did absolutely nothing in any of the rundowns. You know, they won their section, but they won their class, but the classes were only small, and they did nothing in either of the challenge certificates or in the the intermediate section rundown. And in terms of the adult birds, the bird that did best for me was the a cinnamon grey-green, and that won its class. Came, I think, 5th in the CC rundown, but didn't get placed. Definitely didn't get placed in the intermediate rundown. So, and really, it was the intermediate rundown that I was most interested in, because that gives me an idea of where I am in comparison to the other intermediates. Now, bear in mind, I'm only a 2nd year intermediate, so I accept that I'm not going to be, or it's unlikely that I'm going to be, you know, getting best intermediate. But it gives me an idea that I'm still got a long way to go before I can say I'm really challenging within the intermediate section. But with some of those hens, maybe we're heading in the right direction. Anyway, that's all we've got time for in this episode. next episode, I hope we will get the cockbirds out and we'll have a look at which cockbirds are likely to make the breeding team. But until then, as usual, do stay safe and enjoy the birds.